what is prompt engineering then? So a prompt is just the thing that you say to a language model. So of all the people out there, the sort of slightly less than half that have started using Chat GPT in their practice, you know all about this. You say to the LLM, hey, LLM, can you do the following thing? And that's the prompt. And then the LLM responds, yeah, as an LLM, I know a lot about that thing and I'm going to help you out. So the prompt generates the response. And it turns out that LLMs are very sensitive to how you phrase what you say. So small changes in the wording can lead to shockingly large changes in the way the LLM interprets it, the way it phrases the result. And it can be kind of maddening if what you're trying to do is to get it to do something useful. That happens both within a single LLM, but it's even worse across LLMs. So if you use ChatGPT today, and then you try Gemini or some other LLM, the results are even very different. And it is important to keep in mind that LLMs kind of think left to right. All it's doing is it says, given everything I've seen, next word, next word, next word, next word. So you can see it's easy to kind of paint itself into a corner, and it doesn't sort of like say, let me think about that. Let me think about generating the entire sentence, and then I'll sort of, modify it. It just goes word, 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 word. Prompt engineering is just the art of trying to get a LLM to give you answers and also typically or often to do it in the format that you want. Okay, so let's look at some simple prompting methods, and we're going to call these zero shot for reasons that I'll explain here. So these are literally screenshots from a bunch of interactions that I have with ChatGPT. So these are called zero shot because they rely just on the LLM's knowledge. So all I'm doing is I'm rolling up to GPT 3.5 in this case and saying something to it, and it responds. I'm not providing it any data. So I said, hey, what is the scientific name for curcumin? And it goes, the scientific name for curcumin is diphenolylmethane, right? I'm sure people out there know how to pronounce it. I don't. It's a natural compound found in turmeric, curcuma longa. Okay, that's great. It gave me the scientific name, and it just knew that, right? That was baked into the knowledge that it already has. Then I go, all right, well, really, I just want the scientific name. Don't give me the commentary. So I say, what is the scientific name for curcumin? And then I can say, just give the name as your answer, right? Don't give me all the commentary, just give me the name. And then it goes curcumin. So there it is being done, right? I said, what is the scientific name for curcumin? And it goes, oh, well, the name that you gave me is curcumin, and these kinds of things are maddening. What you can do then is you can modify it and say, what is the scientific name for curcumin? Just give the scientific name as your answer. And it like goes, okay, the scientific name for curcumin is boom, there it is. It turns out that for large language models, formatting your prompt like you would for a human can be very important. So look how I've written this thing differently. I'm going to give you the name of a dietary supplement. I'd like you to give the scientific name of the supplement in the following format. So now I've said supplement name, comma, scientific name, and I've labeled the input as curcumin. Now, why is that useful? Just as a computer scientist, typically like white space doesn't matter. Formatting doesn't matter when you're interacting with machines. But the reason formatting matters is because much of the content on the web was written by humans for humans. And so these visual cues can be super important. So all I've done is I've taken that previous prompt and I've added some formatting to it, and it's like almost there, right? So it goes curcumin, but then it gives the IUPAC name for it. It's decided, oh, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this other version of a scientific name. But at least the lesson here is you can sort of start with simple prompts, make them increasingly complicated, pay attention to formatting, and eventually get to something that's very close to the thing that you're looking for. So there are lots of things that you can do at the system level. So it is not uncommon, and we'll see an example of this in a minute, to start out by saying, you are an expert in functional medicine. Simply starting the session with that, in some sense, puts it in the right frame of mind. I will also say that those pleasantries like please can work, right? Because if you think about like the kind of text and the way these things are trained, they are trained to sort of be polite and respond to queries that are posed as if they were posed to humans. So I think for these very simple cases, the use of please is not going to be important, but as the prompting goes on and gets more complicated, that level of sort of using social graces, because those things can be embedded in lots of kinds of text, can be super helpful. Here's an example where I said, I'm going to paste an article below. And I said, please. All right. So I said, please summarize it. And so what I did was I went to the IFM website. There was this article here, Naturally Balancing Thyroid Hormones. And what I did was I just grabbed it, I took the text of it, and then ChatGPT said, sure, please go ahead and paste the article. I'll summarize it for you. I pasted the article and I get a thing that looks like this, right? So the article, Restoring Thyroid Hormone Balance, discusses the importance of maintaining overall optimal thyroid function, talks about different conditions. It also, importantly, in the second paragraph says, well, conventional treatment for hypothyroidism typically involves a variety of things. And this article explores how functional medicine can aid in restoring thyroid balance, right? So here's first three paragraphs, beautifully written, and there were probably three more paragraphs after this that I cut off. But just out of the box, you can get this wonderful summary. After it generated the summary, I said, generate a list of the thyroid conditions that it mentions. And what it does is it says it mentions the following thyroid conditions: hypothyroidism, Graves' disease, Hashimoto's. If you have any more questions or need further information on any of these conditions, feel free to ask, right? So again, we're in this back and forth. And then the next question I asked was, what treatments are mentioned? And notice that it's formatting it in this very nice way, right? And the reason is because lots of information on the web looks like this. So for hyperthyroidism, I can have antithyroid drugs, radioiodine therapy, surgery. So this notion of saying, hey, I've got some content, I would like to get some information extracted from it. Typically, it'll produce it in this very nice kind of, very easy to consume format, which can be super helpful. Now we'll talk about just sort of one advanced prompting technique, which is super interesting and extremely powerful. And so it's called chain of thought. This was published in a paper, I don't know, probably 4 years ago at this point. And it's basically you're engaging the LLM in a dialogue. So what do? You break down the thing that you're asking into a series of questions or steps. And we'll see an example of this on the next two slides. So what you're doing is you're trying to lead the LLM down a good path. And importantly, this notion of give it space to think. So remember what happens is if you ask an LLM a question, and as soon as you hit enter, it just starts generating next word, next word, next word, next word, right? And it does that until it sort of says, okay, end of response. Now, what can happen is if you sort of ask it a series of questions, you ask an initial question and it says some stuff, and then you ask a follow-up question. When you ask that follow-up question, your first question and its response become part of the context that it uses to choose the next words. So in essence, what you're doing is you're letting it sort of think a little bit, give you some information, factor that information into the next thing it says, and so on. So what you're doing is you're like breaking this cycle of just next word, next word, next word, next word, right? You give it time to kind of breathe and think. Now, consider, and I realize that this is a little bit hard to read, this is sort of a chain of thought thing, right? You give it the first prompt, which is, here's the background level. Can you evaluate it for this condition? And then the AI goes, yeah, given the low serum sodium and absence of renal, cardiac, or liver dysfunction, it's a strong consideration. We should look for potential triggers or causes like medications or malignancies. And then you go, oh, okay. Well, they're not taking any medications that should trigger this, and there are no known malignancies. What should we consider next? And so now at that point, that whole bit of conversation is used to try and generate the next output. And he goes, well, absence of common triggers like medications or cancer further supports the possibility we should run some additional tests. And then you go, oh, well, I've actually got the results of those tests. And then it goes, oh, okay, yeah, I see where we're going here. And so basically you sort of kind of keep walking through. The LLM says some stuff, you say some things in response. All of that information is used to generate the final conclusion, which is, it's highly likely next steps would involve identifying reversible causes and initiating appropriate treatment, right? So chain of thought is just, rather than just going, boom, here's what I want, give me the answer, sort of breaking it down into steps and having a little bit of back and forth. Now, the last thing actually we talked about briefly was there's this notion of the system prompt or setting the tone. So here's an example. I said, you are an expert in functional medicine who always gives brief answers to questions. Now, again, like why is that useful? What that's doing is it's doing two things. Because I have said, you are an expert in functional medicine, everything that follows, everything that it generates is going to know that functional medicine is a thing that we're going to be kind of talking about and thinking about. So stuff related to functional medicine is going to be made more likely than other kinds of things, right? More likely than car repair, but then also more likely than traditional medicine, for example. So ChatGPT goes, sure, I'll provide concise and precise answers. How may I assist you? And I said, what are the health benefits of curcumin? It goes, okay, it's the active compound in turmeric. And then here's a bunch of information about some of the health benefits. So remember, in this case, the prompt was, you're an expert in functional medicine who always gives brief answers to questions. Then I said, you're an expert in functional medicine who always gives detailed answers to questions. And I say, what are the health benefits of curcumin? And what it does is it gives me the same things like anti-inflammatory properties and antioxidant activity, but then it goes on and explains it in a bit more detail. And so all of my interactions after that are going to be giving me more detailed responses. Now, I could go up here and say, oh, well, tell me more about the anti-inflammatory properties, and it would do that for me. But that sort of system prompt, which just says, hey, here's the mindset I want you to have as an LLM for our interaction today, is super useful. Very common to do as a way to kind of get going. So last slide I've got is if you want to learn more. And so obviously you'll have access to these slides. OpenAI, producers of the ChatGPT series, have a really, really good tutorial. So if you go through that tutorial, it's sort of written basically at the level at which I've been talking today, but it goes into many more prompting techniques, obviously uses examples that aren't from medicine, but they're all very intuitive. So, that's a great place to go just to go, okay, Tim told me some stuff, but let me kind of like round that out a little bit. Then there's this other link here. It does a deeper dive into more advanced techniques. So the chain of thought is by far the most commonly used prompting technique beyond zero shot, right? Which is just, I'm asking you a question, I hope you know the answer. And then actually there's this PubMed link, which is a tutorial for medical professionals. So it's an article that was saying, hey, here's prompt engineering for medical professionals, but it also has links to sort of lots of other kind of related articles and information if you want to do a little bit of a deeper dive in prompting and language models in the context of medicine.